The mystical core of the great traditions. 6 great religions have shaped the major civilizations that exist today. The 3 Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, plus the 3 Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, sometimes referred to as Confucianism. Those last two, there is quite a lot of overlap, but different in essence. Now, these religions seem to be quite at odds with each other when we look at their outer or exoteric forms, their forms. Not only do they have different rites and rituals and prayers and precepts, but in many cases their most fundamental doctrines about the nature of reality itself appear to contradict each other. That's easy to perceive. Almost anyone would agree. For example, Judaism's "Thou shalt have no other gods but me" seems to stand in direct opposition to Hinduism's exuberant worship of 3 million gods and goddesses. Christianity's Trinity, the triune deity, contrasts sharply with Taoism's amorphous way, the Tao. While Islam's central tenet that there are no gods but God, there is no God but God, appears completely antithetical to Buddhism's insistence that we shouldn't fuss over whether there's a God at all. If we dig more deeply, however, we find that within each of these religious traditions, an inner or esoteric stream of teachings given by their mystics, those men and women who claim to have had a direct realization, a download of wisdom, if you will, of the ultimate nature of reality, seeing the face of God. If we compare the testimonies of these mystics about the nature of this reality and these experiences, we find that despite vast separations in time and place and language and culture, they are strikingly similar. So much so that many scholars have come to view their teachings as constituting a single perennial philosophy, which, like some sort of irrepressible flower, just keeps blooming again and again in the human psyche. One of the primary goals of the work we're doing is to preserve and promote the teachings of these mystics and to show exactly what it is they have in common. And here, for example, we're going to cover 9 points agreed upon by mystics of all the great traditions, together with a sampling of quotes which demonstrate each of those points. The first point of agreement is that all mystics agree that ultimate reality, whether it is called Allah or Brahman, Buddha, nature, Ein Sof, God, Tao, whatever we're calling it, there's an agreement. It cannot be grasped by thought, and it can never be properly expressed in something as limiting as words. In fact, the word mystic is related to the word mute, both of which derive from the Greek root, I think it's pronounced mustis, meaning closed-mouthed. Here are a few supporting scriptural references from different religions. From the Taoist tradition we hear, "The Tao which can be named is not the true Tao." From the Hindu tradition we have, "The Spirit Supreme is immeasurable, inapprehensible, beyond conception." From the Buddhist tradition, we hear that words and sentences are produced by the law of causation and are mutually conditioning. Therefore, they cannot possibly express the highest reality. And from the early Christian tradition, that one which is beyond all thought is inconceivable by all thought. From the Muslim tradition, the Gnostics know, but what they know cannot be communicated. It is not in the power of the professors or the possessors of this most delightful station to coin a word which would denote what they know. The second principle agreed upon is that the reason ultimate reality cannot be grasped by thought or communicated in words is that thoughts and words, by definition, create distinctions. They limit, and hence thereof duality. Even the simple act of naming something creates duality because it distinguishes that thing which is being named from all other things that are left unnamed. However, the mystics of all the great traditions agree that all distinctions are imaginary and that the ultimate nature of reality is not duality. From the Buddhist tradition, we hear that in essence, things are not two but one. All duality is falsely imagined. That's from the Lankavatara Sutra. From the Hindu tradition, Shankara says that no matter what a deluded man may think he is perceiving, he is really seeing Brahman, God, nothing else. This universe, which is superimposed upon God, is nothing but a name. From the Christian tradition, Meister Eckhart teaches that if we will see things truly, they are strangers to goodness, truth, and everything that tolerates any distinction. They are intimates of the One that is bare of any kind of multiplicity or distinction. Rumi, of the Sufi Muslim tradition, taught that oneness is on the other side of descriptions and states. I think he's saying, referring to states of mind. Nothing but duality enters speech's playing field. Nothing but duality enters the playing field of speech. From the Jewish tradition, we hear that there all things are as one. Distinctions between life and death, land and sea, have lost their meaning. That's actually from an anonymous Hasidic master, but from the Jewish tradition. The third principle agreed upon by the mystics of all traditions is that although mystics cannot define ultimate reality in words, they still use words to point to it, to point to that which is beyond. For instance, while all mystics agree that while ultimate reality constitutes the true nature of everything, sometimes itself is described better as nothing. That's a hard one for a lot of people to grasp, but let's take a look from the Hindu tradition. In the Upanishads, we read neti neti. If you're looking for God, practice not this, not that. Lama Yeshe from the Buddhist tradition says that emptiness is the ultimate nature of everything that exists. From the Taoist tradition, Lao Tzu teaches that the myriad creatures in the world are born from something, and something is born from nothing. Again, from the Christian tradition, it is within our intellects, souls, and bodies in heaven, on earth, and while remaining the same in itself, it is at once in, around, and above the world. Super celestial, super essential, a sun, a star, fire, water, spirit, dew, cloud, stone, rock, all that is, and yet is nothing. In the Muslim tradition, he is not accompanied by thingness, nor do we ascribe it to him. The negation of thingness from him is one of his essential attributes. Did you catch that? They're saying the primary attribute is no attributes. And from the Jewish tradition, we hear that the hidden God, the innermost being of divinity, so to speak, has neither qualities nor attributes. That was said by Gershom Scholem. And the fourth principle agreed upon by virtually all of the mystics of the world is that although mystics say ultimate reality is not a thing, they also agree that this emptiness or this no-thingness is not an empty, it's not a mere vacuum. It is radiant with light. It is pregnant with potentiality. It is pure spirit, primordial awareness, Buddha mind, consciousness itself. From the Hindu tradition, we're taught that he is the eternal among things that pass away, pure consciousness of consciousness beings. In the Buddhist tradition, all the Buddhas and all the sentient beings are nothing but the one mind, besides which nothing exists. St. Augustine of the Christian tradition taught that the light by which the soul is illumined is done so in order that it may see and truly understand everything. It is God himself. In the Muslim tradition, we learn that he is the spirit of the cosmos, its hearing, its sight, and its hand. Through him, the cosmos hears. Through him, it sees. Through him, it speaks. Through him, it grasps. Through him, it runs. And from the Jewish tradition, we learn that the mind comes from this sublime and completely unified source above. It is divided only as it enters into the universe of distinctions. The fifth principle agreed on by virtually all mystics of the world is that when distinctions created by imagination are taken to be real, especially the distinctions between subject and object, or self and world, when we do that, we lose sight of the ultimate nature of reality and fall into a lot of delusion. And this is the cause of all our suffering. I'm not saying it's the cause of all of our pain, but definitely our suffering. In the Buddhist tradition, we learn that the fundamental dysfunction of our minds takes the form of a separation between I and other. We falsely grasp at an I on which attachment grafts itself, at the same time as we conceive of an other, which is the basis of our aversions. In the Hindu tradition, we learn that so long as the sense of me and mine remains, there is bound to be sorrow and want. In the Christian tradition, in the cloud of unknowing, it says that every man has plenty of cause for sorrow, but he alone understands the deep universal reason for sorrow, who experiences that he is. In the Muslim tradition, we learn that as long as you are you, you will be miserable and impoverished. So be more than you. Know you are more than you. And in the Jewish tradition, how can any finite vessel hope to contain the endlessness of God? Therefore, see yourself as nothing. Only one who is nothing can contain the fullness of the presence of God. The sixth principle is the fact that distinctions are not ultimately real means that we are not truly separate selves. We're not separate because the distinctions of separation are not real. In reality, all mystics declare our true nature is God. If you prefer the word nature or consciousness or Buddha nature or Brahman, feel free. The Buddhist tradition teaches that our very self nature is the Buddha, and apart from this nature there is no other Buddha. The Taoist tradition teaches that having left aside life and death, you are now completely one with the universal transmutation. You're one with the process of all of life. The Hindu tradition teaches that God is one's very own self, the breath of one's breath, the life of one's life. Meister Eckhart from the Christian tradition taught that some simple people think that they will see God as if he were standing there and themselves standing over here. But it is not so. God and I, we are one. Islam teaches that thou art he, without one of these limitations. Then, if thou know thine own existence thus, then thou knowest God, and if not, then not. In the Jewish tradition, we learn that for now he is no longer separated from his master. And behold, he is his master, and his master is he. The seventh principle is that although the truth of one's identity, being one with ultimate reality, although that cannot be grasped by thought, all mystics testify that it can be realized or recognized through a process that seems like an awakening, which bypasses the thinking mind altogether. The Buddhist tradition teaches that the time will come when your mind will suddenly come to a stop, like an old rat who finds himself in a cul-de-sac. Then there will be a plunging into the unknown, with the cry, "Ah, this!" The Hindu tradition teaches that when the mirror of my mind became clear, I saw that God is not other than me, and this non-dual knowledge completely destroyed all thoughts of you and I. I came to know that this entire world is not different from God. From the Christian tradition, we hear that renouncing all that the mind may conceive, wrapped entirely in the intangible and the invisible, he belongs completely to him who is beyond everything. Here, being neither oneself nor someone else, one is supremely united by a completely unknowing inactivity of all knowledge, and knows beyond the mind by knowing nothing. Islam says that he sees only God as being that which he sees, perceiving the seer to be the same as the seen. This is enough, and God is the giver of grace, the guide. In Judaism, we learn that it is by descending into the depths of his own self that man wanders through all the dimensions of the world. In his own self, he lifts the barriers which separate one sphere from another. In his own self, finally, he transcends the limits of natural existence, and at the end of his ways, without, as it were, a single step beyond himself, he discovers that God is all in all, and there is nothing but him. The eighth principle the mystics agree upon is that realizing our identity with this ultimate reality brings freedom from suffering. The Hindu Upanishads teach that when a man knows God, he is free. His sorrows have an end, and birth and death are no more. Bokar Rinpoche from the Buddhist tradition teaches, what is suffering? What is death? In reality, they do not have any existence. They appear within the framework of manifestations and distinctions produced by the mind. In the emptiness of mind, there is no death, no one dies, there is no suffering and no fear. From the Jewish tradition, we hear that when the false apprehension is negated from the heart of the enlightened ones. Then death shall be swallowed up forever, and God will erase tears from every face. That sounds like relieving suffering to me. From the Confucian tradition, it says, "Suddenly I realized, it really is like this. In reality, there is not a single thing." With this single thought, all entanglements were broken. Suddenly, it was as if a load of 100 pounds had fallen to the ground in an instant. It was as if a flash of lightning had penetrated the body and pierced the intelligence. Meister Eckhart from the Christian tradition teaches that this man lives in one light with God, and therefore there is not in him either suffering or the passage of time even, only an unchanging eternity. The Muslim tradition teaches through the poetry of Rumi we hear that I have been delivered from this ego and self-will. Alive or dead, what an affliction! But alive or dead, I have no homeland other than God's bounty. The ninth and last principle, for the purposes of this study, the last principle that virtually all mystics agree upon is that their teachings about the ultimate nature of reality should not be taken on faith. That's right, they should not be taken on faith. Just as scientific theories can be verified by anyone willing to perform appropriate experiments, mystical teachings can be verified by anyone willing to engage in appropriate spiritual practices. From Buddhism, we hear, those who practice know whether realization is attained or not, just as those who drink water know whether they are thirsty or not. In Hinduism, we hear, the pure truth of Atman, which is buried under Maya and the effects of Maya, can be reached by meditation. Atman is the pure soul. It can be reached by meditation, contemplation, and other spiritual disciplines. The Taoist tradition teaches, if you don't wash out the stone and sand, how can you pick out the gold? Lower your head and bore into the hole of open non-reification. Carefully seek the heart of heaven and earth with firm determination. Suddenly you will see the original thing. From Judaism, the patriarchs opened up the channels of the mind in the world, teaching all who were to come into the world how to dig within themselves a spring of living waters, to cleave to their fountain, the root of their lives. From the Muslim tradition, we learn that the way of the Sufis is the way of the exact knowing of God, and of the knowledge of the diverse ways of self-training necessary for the knowledge of God. In the Christian tradition and from Jesus himself, we hear the words, if you follow my teachings, then you are truly my disciples, and you shall come to a knowing of the truth, and the truth